Professor Gatte, Dr. Genberg, Senior Deputy Governor Dr. Veerasinghe, Deputy Governors, senior colleagues, research scholars, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. And let me say it's a particular pleasure to welcome our guests and foreign scholars who have come from abroad to participate in this international research conference, and also to express our gratitude for their efforts in contributing papers for the conference. Thank you very much. I must also thank my colleagues in the Economic Research Department for giving me the material for these remarks that I am about to deliver. Today is a landmark occasion in the annual research calendar of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. The foundations for making this event an international research conference was laid in 2008 under the leadership of the current Senior Deputy Governor, Dr. Veerasinghe, who was at the time the Director of Economic Research. The aim was to provide a platform for researchers from policymaking and academic institutions around the world to share their findings, innovations, and views. It is a great pleasure to see that this conference has evolved successfully and matured over the years. It has opened up opportunities for both local and foreign researchers to discuss new findings under an array of timely and important macroeconomic themes. In my remarks, I will try to relate today's conference theme to the Sri Lankan monetary policy context. The Director of Economic Research, Dr. Indrajit, has already covered some of the ground, so please bear with me if I do repeat some of that. As Sri Lanka moves towards upper middle income country threshold, albeit with some slowdown during recent years, the evolving complexity of the economy and markets needs to be taken into consideration in the country's policy agenda to ensure that the overall policy framework remains well focused to meet the upcoming challenges. To facilitate the changes that have taken place during recent times and to make provisions for the envisaged developments that are expected to take place in the economy, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has an obligatory role to put in place an appropriate framework to ensure price stability which supports a high and sustained economic growth trajectory. In response, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has taken several initiatives to move to a flexible inflation targeting regime as its monetary policy framework. This transition, as you all know, is not an easy task. This process requires a holistic approach in policy formulation with strong and consistent policy coordination, particularly between the central bank and the government, together with continued commitment from key economic stakeholders. Given this background, the theme of this year's conference is very relevant in the Sri Lankan context, particularly to the large number of participants who are representing policy formulation bodies, government agencies, and financial institutions, as well as to researchers who will benefit from the new research findings that are being shared today. Why inflation targeting? The central banks around the world are assigned the responsibility of conducting monetary policy to maintain low and stable inflation. To achieve the ultimate objective of price stability, a well-established framework is needed to operationalize the conduct of monetary policy. In the Sri Lankan context, after the currency board system that prevailed at the time of independence, monetary policy was conducted with purely exchange rate considerations up to the late 1970s and the breakdown of the Bretton Woods fixed exchange rate system. Since the 1980s, a monetary targeting framework has been in place. However, the weakening relationship between money supply and inflation, financial deepening, instability in the money demand function, as well as international best practices, prompted the Central Bank of Sri Lanka to upgrade the monetary targeting frameworks towards FIT. The enabling environment has also been improved by continuous mid-single-digit inflation that has prevailed during the past several years. In fact, next month, i.e. January 2019, will mark 120 months or 10 years of continuous single-digit inflation, which could be considered a notable achievement for the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, given the high inflation legacy of the past. Now, of course, one needs to take into account that we've lived in a low inflation or even deflationary context in the last decade. But even when one discounts for that, Sri Lanka inflationary performance has improved. We have been fortunate in that imported inflation has been less of an issue. We've had, of course, we had decades of high inflation in the 1780s and even 90s. And then we had, I think since probably after the Asian financial crisis, the Russian-Mexico debt and the dot-com bubble bursting, we had some years of, I think which were described as a nice period, the non-inflationary continuous expansion period. And then we've had the global financial crisis and a low inflation context. But even after you take all that into account, if you look at monetary policy conduct prior to the last decade, particularly prior to 2012, since the stabilization package that was introduced in 2012 and the rather robust monetary policy tightening that was introduced as part of that stabilization package, Sri Lanka's inflation performance has improved significantly. Further, as evidenced in the global research arena, FIT as a framework for conducting monetary policy has yielded significant benefits in terms of reducing inflation volatility, lowering the impact of shocks, and anchoring inflation expectations. Now, successful transitions towards FIT requires committed and strong policies to fulfill certain supplementary prerequisites. These include the central bank's instrumental independence and an explicit mandate to achieve price stability, a strong fiscal position with freedom from fiscal dominance, a flexible exchange rate regime, which acts as the first line of defense, a well-developed financial system, reasonably well-understood channels between policy instruments and inflation, a well-contained inflation environment, a sound technical infrastructure for inflation forecasting that ensures the accuracy of forecasts, and transparent policies to build accountability and credibility of the central bank. In this context, we have identified three major pillars, which will be the building blocks for adopting FIT in Sri Lanka. 1, effective monetary policy conduct. 2, strong central bank mandate, credibility and accountability. And 3, strong fiscal policy support and monetary fiscal coordination. To assure effective monetary policy conduct under the FTI, we need to establish a sound, increasingly forward-looking decision-making process based on reliable macroeconomic forecasts and projections. Because as you know, we're basically setting monetary policy, targeting inflation expectations a year ahead. So clearly for that to be done effectively, the capacity to model and forecast needs to be robust. In this connection, the central bank has already improved technical capacity in modeling and forecasting key macroeconomic variables with the assistance of the International Monetary Fund, while also learning from the experience of pioneers as far as inflation targeting is concerned amongst advanced and emerging market economies. A strong central bank mandate and credibility is of utmost importance for successful adoption of the FIT framework. International experience suggests that a weak legal mandate, poor accountability and transparency, together with less economy, has hampered successful adoption of FIT and has led to a number of deviations from the inflation target. Accountability in terms of implementation of monetary policy by the central bank emphasizes the need for proactively solving credibility problems that can arise when policy is determined under discretion. Optimal inflation targeting regimes balances the need to ensure accountability based on a strongly data-driven approach with the ability to monitor and determine monetary policy with some amount of discretion. The ability to monitor is also necessary to ensure the transparency of policy decisions. This requires strengthening the central bank's communication channels as well. Inflation targeting is well understood as management of expectations. In this context, transparency in monetary policy is clearly vital. This places a very high premium on effective communication. We believe our communication must be open, objective, and up-to-date to effectively anchor expectations of the stakeholders. Central bank independence, of course, does not mean total independence from the government. In the context of emerging and developing countries in particular, fiscal monetary coordination assumes significant importance for achieving a successful FIT regime. In emerging economies, joint determination of the inflation target by both the government and the central bank has become popular, and the government's involvement in supply-side policies to mitigate supply shocks is an essential part of the overall framework for maintaining low inflation. However, while maintaining appropriate policy coordination among the central bank and the government, it is vital to take necessary actions to enhance central bank independence, accountability, and transparency. It has been witnessed around the world that extensive monetary financing as a result of poor sovereignty of central bank hinders the success of FIT by creating large deviations from the inflation target. Monetizing the deficit has to be avoided. Ideally, this should be entrenched in law. Accommodating a robust framework for FIT has necessitated amendments to existing laws, particularly the foundational law of the central bank, which is the Monetary Law Act, to enhance the focus of the mandate, ensuring central bank autonomy, as well as to strengthen governance, transparency, and accountability. These amendments would broadly include making price stability the primary objective, the separation of monetary and fiscal functions, strengthening central bank autonomy, institutional arrangements for setting and meeting inflation targets, and maintaining accountability. Going forward, the coming years are critical in fulfilling the remaining prerequisites, including cohesive and consistent policy coordination between the central bank and the government. Before transition to FIT, several key milestones, particularly legal amendments, continuation of fiscal consolidation, further strengthening technical capacity of the central bank, and building awareness amongst the general public and other stakeholders have to be achieved. Accordingly, I'm confident that the research findings presented today would not only expand our knowledge base and contribute to the macroeconomic research literature, but it will also support our effort to implement the FIT framework successfully in Sri Lanka and provide valuable lessons for other similar small open economies as well. Thank you very much, and I wish you productive deliberations during the course of the day. Thank you.